Hi. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak here today. Um, I've given a couple of talks here at Foo Café. I've also given a couple of talks at other places, but this is definitely my favorite spot, uh, my favorite place to share and talk because people are always so nice. People are smiling. You're not sitting in front of stone-faced people who are staring at you, and you have no idea if they react or not. So thank you for letting me be here again. And I hope you still have some mental space um, because this might be a little bit like what I'm going to talk about is maybe a little bit more high level and not, but it's not very technical. So that's good, I guess. Um, so I'm Sonja. I'm the head of UX and a co-founder at a design studio here in Malmö. So as that, I do mostly UX design and deal with design teams of different configurations. Um, and I try to stay up to date with like methods and trends that are happening in the design world and also in the tech world. And around last year, at some point, there was a situation on most of the design and tech blogs that maybe some of you have also heard was called the tech backlash. Suddenly, every platform was bashing on Facebook, Google, Airbnb, Uber, all the big Silicon Valley unicorns, but also tons of smaller startups that have really good intentions but manage to screw up somewhere along the way with unusable products, unethical practices, or excluding certain demographics, being racist, being sexist, you name it. Like something in their product was broken. And journalists were not really quiet about it, which is good, I guess. You need to call out everybody who's like doing something wrong, remind them of their privilege. Um, but it wasn't only towards tech; it was also towards designers. Like the design generation has failed. I was like, whew, they're talking about us. Okay, of course I want to do stuff better. Um, how? How do I do this? Because there was like this common denominator throughout all these articles and criticisms of like you need to build better products. But I don't know if someone of you has tried to establish like a sports routine or trying to lose weight. Someone telling you stop eating cookies. It's not very helpful. It's like how? Why? So I was really, really frustrated reading through this, feeling absolutely responsible and also utterly helpless. Um, so I'm a very curious person and I try to find out how things work, where something sits, why doesn't don't things work out, and that's kind of why I hope I'm kind of a okay UX designer, because that's like the underlying thing, trying to figure out processes and what people do and why. Um, and yeah, this was a question that was kind of with me for that year. Like, why is this so hard? Nobody sets out to build a shoddy product. Nobody sets out to fail along the process. Um, they're just mostly unaware, or they must be doing something else wrong. So there was this project that came up around that time. We were starting to work with Electrolux on a smart home system. I was thinking this is a really good product or project to look at what we're doing and how we're doing it to identify how this could maybe be done better in the future. And then maybe I can share this. And this is what this talk is about what we did in this project and how I think it might be helpful in addressing some of the challenges that people are facing right now, that designers, developers with new products are facing right now, of trying to make the world a little bit better place. Okay, so when we're looking at something like a smart home, we're effectively looking at something that I would call a multisensory interface. You're moving beyond screens, you're moving beyond buttons into a space that is where everything becomes an interface, where everything starts to interact, be smart, be responsive, and you need to think as a designer in much broader terms than, ooh, which button do I need to put where in order to enable this motivation? It's just so much more complex. And I wanted to think a little bit about, okay, what are the methodologies that we should use and stuff. And I started realizing we are not working with one single product anymore. And all tools and methods that we know that are concerning one single product, they won't do. We're looking at an ecosystem here. And when you look at what ecosystem means, it's a complex network of interconnected systems. Yes, that is it. It's not necessarily biological, but all the other things totally apply to this kind of work that you're doing, right? So you're not thinking about products anymore. You're moving beyond that. And if we look at how the design professional way has been the last few years, we kind of started outgrowing individual screens. There was first responsive designs, because it's not just desktop, it's suddenly also mobile, and then it's smartphone, and then it's tablets, and then it's smartwatches. And then we went into starting to think about designs in systems with like individual elements that start to be intertwined with each other. And actually it's kind of just natural that now from that we move on to something, to thinking in terms of ecosystems. It's like a natural progression, or at least it feels like it. But oh, sorry. But it's really worth it to think about what happens on this transition. So when you've worked with a product team, you kind of start with, okay, you have a UX designer and you have a visual designer. These two people need to talk to each other, and there are methods in place and tools, and it kind of works most of the time. And then you also have a product manager, and sometimes it becomes a little bit tricky here, but there's Scrum and there's Agile, and it's supposed to work better. And then you have the front-end designer too that comes into place, and they don't necessarily talk the same language, but it's okay. They maybe sometimes do or not. But the UX designer also really wants to have a researcher on board, and everything becomes a little bit more complex. And then you also need a service designer when you start to think about services and not just products. And then because you're also thinking about appliances in a smart home context, you also have a product engineer. And as soon as you have an engineer, you also need an industrial designer, which talks about totally different kind of interfaces than the visual designer does. And if you're in there as like a lead person, you kind of end up with this situation where you just try to keep everybody online. And this is the only kitten gift that I have. Take it in. It's kind of like halftime of the talk. But every time when there's this frustrating situation where you need to make people talk to each other, understand each other, I try to look at this and be like, they're kittens, they're cute kittens. They mean well. But how can we solve this? So when you look at, or when I started looking at this, I identified, or I thought, hey, there are two things about this that are challenging, right? There's first off the product, like what is it that you're trying to build with a bunch of kittens? And then there's a process in the environment in terms of like, how do you actually want to build this with a bunch of kittens? And when you think about an ecosystem or a smart home or something, and it's not just the smartphone, it becomes smart products, and they're like inherently wicked. They have challenges in them that we don't know yet how to solve as designers. First thing would be that most of the smart products, they are supposed to be, smart, anticipatory. They understand context. They are supposed to react in a way that they anticipate what you need and, be forthcoming. And for that, they need to know the context and they need to know you. And for that, they need data. And as soon as we have data, there are privacy concerns. So everybody is totally expecting the smart product to be anticipatory, and nobody wants to give up their data and have a privacy breach. Great. Then we want these products to be usable, but not just usable. They're supposed to be intuitive. So you don't need to think about what you're doing. It should be just natural and come to you without any cognitive effort. But you know what comes to you without a lot of cognitive effort? Bad habits. Not necessarily good habits. Like those are work and they take time and effort, and nobody wants an interface that takes time and effort. So we basically end up designing for bad habits. And then last part is that when you want to connect a lot of products, they need to be integrated in this entire network. And ideally, you can talk to different players, like your Amazon Echo can talk to your Philips Lights, and everybody wants to talk to the other players, but you still want to be unique as a brand. You still want to like point out and be the shining single example of like excelling design. So that also works really great. Everybody is supposed to work together except me. I'm supposed to stand out. So super easy to design for. And then when you look at the process, it's not even that we're set up in a good way to deal with this. Especially when you start working in a company that's trying to, adapt to some Silicon Valley methodologies. I don't know who here has been in this situation, but there is this discussion rule that you never say no. You are also not allowed to say yes, but you're only about to say yes and, because that's positive. So positive vibes only. Criticism becomes really hard. Calling someone out on doing something the right way is really hard when you do that way. And you just end up going along with things that are really not ideal because you don't find the right way to criticize it. And then there's a good thing that companies are more open towards research. That's good. We need research. We need user research. We need data. Except when these numbers start to be used as politics. A/B testing is not a proper tool to test smart products. It's not working. But it gives you numbers, which are totally easy to skew towards your own propaganda. So walking this line between wanting to enable data and numbers, but not trying to fall into some kind of like ego motivation of like, this is my own purpose, is also extremely difficult as a design team. And then the last part, the one that's my personal pet peeve, is that all of the companies that were in the headlines in the beginning, they all have a purpose. They all want to make the world a better place while making money. So everything that they put on their flags is only half of the truth. It's like, we want to connect the world while making money, so we're going to put ads in our service as well. And as a designer going in super motivated, or also a developer, it's like, yes, we want to enable this first half, and then you're like blocked halfway through because the second half is actually not fulfilled, is extremely demotivating. I call that the purpose but. Like, we doing Scrum, but we have a purpose but. Also not really helpful. Okay, so this was all the stuff that I kind of observed. It's like, okay, this is where it's going to be hard. So what did we end up doing? Something that every designer throws at every challenge, I feel: workshops. But it kind of worked. We started with intensifying the communication. Talking helps a lot. It's super exhausting, but it helps. Because when you actually start to connect designers and managers and product managers and developers, product developers, people start to talk and bring up their own languages and their own words. And we started documenting everything that came up in these workshops, but in a very appliance independent way that I'm going to show later on. And we also, addressing the purpose but, called out again new acceptance criteria that were not relevant or not applicable to like individual products, but to the entire system as a whole, as the impact that this system had in a bigger scope on this user using it. So by introducing these ones, it was actually possible for someone in another department to call out an engineer in another department, even though they didn't necessarily have the product expertise, but saying, come on, as a system, this is not fulfilled if you actually integrate this. I don't know what you're building, but this is not working on a higher level. Yes, documentation independent. No, application independent documentation. Long words. So we started with what we call multi-level stories. This is an abstracted form of it. They're actually like really, really, really long. But I guess a lot of you know a tool that's called a day in the life, or a moment in the day, where you basically pick a user story and you map the individual flows and the individual steps and look at like, okay, this persona, what does it do? But we started to integrate all of the potential interaction formats that could come up, bringing into all of the different products. So it was not just a screen, it was also conversational interaction if we want to have voice interfaces. It was haptic interactions when we have physical interfaces for the appliances. It was setting interactions when we have a smartphone that has an app. So all of that was mapped out as individual streams, so that we could go through and see like which way of interacting, which paradigm actually makes most sense in these situations, which touch point should we work with. And then we started mapping the individual functions and controls towards applications and smartphones. I know, applications and appliances. And by doing that, we didn't actually go into depth for like, okay, this vacuum cleaner needs this washing machine needs that, but more in total. So again, this is a little bit, so this entire thing is under NDA, so I can't show you the actual things, but this is how it looks with like function A, function B, function C. What is a general control that needs to be there on every kind of appliance? What is something that's actually a function that could that's unique to certain appliances, or that separates these things from other appliances? What is a feedback? What is a multi-layered action that actually requires follow-up on other touch points, for example? And by mapping them, we were able to basically cluster and create families of functions and controls that we then applied on to a UI family that was consistent of multiple different elements like the visual, sounds, and physical. And when you start mapping them together, you realize that they actually go really, really nicely together and complement each other. So starting from sound, you have like something like signature sounds that are very very strong, like your ringtone on your phone. It doesn't come up very often, but you can definitely recognize it. That goes very nicely when you look at the visual UI, that you have a layout. It's just there. It's a big thing. It's very recognizable. Same as material for physical UIs. It's something that is there that just creates the entire experience. If you go to the bottom of it, system sounds, they're small. You shouldn't really notice them. They're just reinforcements of your interaction. Same goes for animations and visual UIs. Same goes, for example, resistance affordance and physical UIs. So we started mapping those families onto all of these different interaction channels, basically. And then we made some observations along the way for the process of how this kind of like mapping of functions, of controls, of appliance independent interactions actually enabled us to change the process a little bit and the environment. By having a shared language where people across multiple departments could actually start to talk about shared goals and values, was able to criticize people. It was possible to call people out because you had this shared set of acceptance criteria. Everybody bought into that, right? You also had a shared acceptance of the overall flow because all of the affordances, all of the touch points were actually accounted for in the user flow, in the multi-layered story, basically. So everybody was operating on the same narrative. And then, because everybody was part of this, because everybody was invited to the table, it was also totally fine to discuss things and, throw things out that were not working. So it just became much, much easier to talk about things in a more abstract level before taking it out to the product level, so that people didn't feel as attacked because it was their product that people were talking about, right? And then thinking about the products that actually came out of it, or the suggestions that we made based on that, it's the product, the suggestions that we made for the products was basically stay in context for the user scenario that you're designing for. Your washing machine shouldn't be engaged when you're in the kitchen or something like that. be very, very conscious about these boundaries of the system, because the system is there all the time. If you only activate a certain touch point within it, that's fine. Stay out of the user's face, basically. Utilize friction that comes up anyway. Not everything has to be smooth and seamless. Not everything needs to be absolutely comfortable all the time. If a user is starting to activate all appliances at once, maybe that shouldn't be totally easy when you actually have the control, because that's a total waste of energy. So don't make that so easy. Call them out on it. And put the coherence first in terms of interactions. So that was tied to the branding principle. We want to stand out. No, take yourself back. It's not about the brand at this point anymore. Designing this holistic system, it's not about the brand. It's about the user and the affordance for the user that's provided. Yeah, and in the end, we came up with a couple of principles that are actually very close to just general good UX principles, but a little bit defined and applied to the context that they could basically continue with that. It's like create one design DNA for all the actors that both a product developer as well as a visual designer adhere to. A design for the silence in between interactions. Just because nothing is happening doesn't mean nothing is happening. There's also things happening when the user is not interacting with the system, and you're totally accountable for that as a designer or a developer as well. Design for the context, which is like stay out of the user's face if they don't need you to be in their face at that moment. And design for consistency in terms of they can coin new paradigms, but that means people need to learn new interface paradigms, new interactions. That's not necessarily good. You don't want to force people to learn or adapt new behaviors just because the brand wants to stand out. Don't do that. And that's it. Thank you.